fourth of our user experience design talks. This one here we're going to have a look at seeing, or actually more importantly, what we don't see or are inclined to occasionally miss. So it's about not seeing the whole picture, quite like this image. So looking through this, you can see down the bottom you have a mouse to a cat to a dog to a horse to chimpanzee to an elephant, and we can kind of see those groupings or think that we perceive those groupings, even though the particular outline of any one in particular is indistinct. And in this particular talk, we want to really to highlight that what it is we perceive often is determined by context, by what we expect to see. And it's quite often and easy for us to miss something if we're not paying or expecting to maybe to see it or particularly having a look for it. And it's quite a famous example I'm sure you've heard of. You got a still from the video here where it was a group of people, a couple of basketballs, and the viewer was asked to count the number of times that a basketball was thrown between two people. And in the middle of the video, you had somebody dressed up in a gorilla suit who wandered out, stood in the middle, looked at the camera, waved, and then walked out of shot. And for a significant percentage of the people who took the test, at the end they would give you probably the correct answer, the number of times the ball was exchanged. But if you asked them, did you notice anything strange about the video? They said no. You said, do you not notice the gorilla that walked on and waved and walked off? And it came as an utter surprise to them. They would go, no, I certainly would have saw that. That would be an unusual thing. I would not have missed it. But yet, a significant number of people do. So because they were not expecting this, because they were not paying attention to that, it still happened, but it was not something that they consciously acknowledged as important or they should take note of. Example here on the right hand side of 4 pages where we've got a next and a previous button, and you can see that page 1, page 2, page 3 uses a consistent layout for the arrangement of the next and the previous, and page 4 reverses it. If you were to have an interface similar to that, stepping through it, a significant number of your users we get to page 4 and head back, go back to page 3, would end up being confused. Again, it's because they did not expect it to be there, so they never actually saw what was there, or didn't consciously perceive what was there. So, what we are aware of, what we perceive, depends upon a number of factors. It depends upon our past experiences of doing this or doing related things in terms of, well, what has happened then? What would we expect to come next? What would we expect to pop up at this point in time? It also ties into additionally what we're trying to achieve at the present. So again, what it is we're trying to achieve will dictate or determine what it is we see. Equally, depending on the future goals that we have, that too will help influence or shape what we see. So a lot of information comes in, but the things that we pay attention to are either what we expect based on previous history, what we are focusing on now, what we're currently doing, or can also be affected by where we want to get to in the future in terms of our long-term goals. So it says our experiences, context, and goal act to filter what we perceive. So we're not aware of everything. We focus on a few specific elements, and those elements are selected based on context, experience, and goals. And obviously that's important then in terms of how we design our applications. Why is it important? So you wouldn't assume that, okay, I'm doing an application, I want to provide some information to the user, so I'm a programmer, I will simply print it out, maybe do some label or whatever. And from the programmer's point of view, job's done. I've presented the information to the user. It would be wrong to assume that because it has simply been output somewhere on the screen, that this is something that the user is going to be aware of. Instead, we as designers, as developers, anytime that we provide some information to the user, we should ask a couple of key questions. Firstly, ask why. Why is the user going to be looking for this information? Why are they going to expect it or want to pay attention to it? And secondly, how are we going to present it to the user so that it is visible to them? And the example we have, the picture here, is one of the classic spot the difference pictures, where let's assume that the user was looking at the left-hand side of the screen. They looked away briefly. I displayed my information, and they come back and they're now looking at the right-hand side of the screen. And we've got to work out, well, what is difference between before and after? And it's not something that we necessarily find easy. So when we're presenting information, we want to make sure we present it in a way where we're confident that yes, the user will be able to see this, because they may not. There's different ways we can help do this and help accomplish this. The first one is avoid ambiguity, or any confusion over it. We should build or design around established norms and conventions. And this ties into the idea that what the user expects to see is based on their previous experiences. So if they have used a bunch of controls or completed a dialogue, for example, opening or saving a file, and they've done that on a lot of applications in the past, then they have a mental model about what it is they expect to see available, what it is they expect could go wrong. And if we tie in with the conventions associated with that, then it's going to help the user to engage with our particular application. If we break the conventions, that'll make it very much more difficult. Sometimes you do have a novel interface design that there isn't really any established conventions. In that case, you test it actually with user groups. You get users to go through and use your application, ask them about what they're thinking about, get them to try to do things and check to see, well, what do they find easy, what don't they find easy, and then iterate and improve. Be consistent. Again, this is a general form of the previous one. The previous one said there are established norms, use them. So there we are being consistent. But where possible, in the general sense, we should be consistent in how we design our interfaces. That if we are dealing with a particular process and we want to display some information with it, we want to be consistent in terms of grouping it and linking it together and making it look to have the same visual feel and appearance of the user. It's more easy to associate that with the activity they're doing. This is a difficult one. Ultimately, it's the high value one. So when users are using our application, we as designers ideally want to think, well, why is the user going to find themselves there? What are they going to want to do when they find themselves in this condition? What information they're going to be looking for? Where are they likely to be looking at on the screen? And if we understand what the user is trying to do, the goals of the user at a point in time, it means that we can try to design our interface so that we provide the information we think the user will need. We structure things in a way that's going to, again, align with whatever task they have. So fundamentally, it's about us as designers putting ourselves in the, if you like, the notional shoes of our users and thinking about, well, if I was the user, what would I be looking for? What would I want to see? Where will I find this information? And then designing our interface in a way that helps the user easily locate and to see all of these different aspects. So just a few minor asides in terms of some of our limitations of our visual system. Our color vision is limited. And I'm not talking here about color blindness, I'm talking about how we generally perceive colors within applications. And there's a few sort of rules is the wrong word, but a few guidelines in terms of if we're using color to differentiate or to separate out different elements, we need to be slightly cautious in terms of how we do this. So first of all, in terms of actually how we perceive colors, our eyesight is much more sensitive to differences in colors and brightness. The absolute color and brightness we're not that sensitive to. Example I very much like here, where we have a grid. We've got two squares labeled A and B. And A, I look at this and I see it as a dark grey. B, I look at it and go, that's a light grey colour. But the reality is that both the colours in the tile A and tile B are identical. There is zero difference between the two, even though I perceive them as being very, very different colours. If I were to do a screen capture and then look at the pixels in each of them, perfectly identical colours. Certain colour combinations don't go together well, and we should avoid those. So avoid blue and green text on a red background, red and green text on a blue background, these types of combinations. And you've got chromostereosis gives you the visual appearance of depth, where one sort of text appears to be hovering above or below the background colour. So there's a few colour combinations we want to avoid because they'll not help the usability of the application. So how do we get noticed then within our interface design? And we're thinking here of we want to provide some information to the user. It could be an error message, could be a new piece, could be an alert, whatever. How are we going to make sure that it is something the user notices? And there's a couple of different techniques we can use. Okay, so we know that our peripheral vision isn't great. We generally focus on one bit of the screen. That's the area around that we see in good clarity, and the rest of the screen generally is a little bit fuzzy or out of it's peripheral vision. It's not something we have a great awareness of. Generally, if we have movement in the peripheral vision, we notice that, but the fine details within it we generally don't notice. So here's an example of bad layout where we could be introducing something that the user may miss. It's a login screen, so we ask the login ID, got the password, and then we have the login button. So it's reasonable to assume that the user will be clicking on the login button to sort of click that whenever they entered in their details. Now, what they're likely to see then is the example down at the bottom. Login button, that's the thing they're looking at. It's in good focus. The rest of the screen is kind of peripheral vision. So if we were to display an error message in that peripheral vision, there's a chance that it would be missed by the user. They wouldn't recognize that, oh, something's happened in their peripheral vision, and could notice that and be left confused as to, hold on, why is login not working? How do we get around that? There's a couple of established norms, and again, we're interested in following norms. First one is we put it where we believe the user is likely to be looking. So you've seen the screenshot down here, similar thing with username, password, we've got a sign in button. And we are displaying our error message around or next to the sign in button. So we're, if it's not successful, we're going to display our error message in a location of the screen where we think, yeah, the user's probably or may still be looking at that particular one. Use a symbol. So there we're using a small icon, sort of a warning symbol to highlight that there's something of concern. Symbols are good because they're very quickly and easily recognized. We can identify symbols quite easily, and there's a few established ones about error or warning or success or whatever that we can use. So again, you quite quickly convey the intent and purpose of that message to the user. Third one we have is reserve a bright color for errors, and certainly in Western societies, quite often red is used as your traditional error color, that if the user sees some red text appearing on the screen, they know there's something here that they need to, hasn't gone well, they need to look at. It is a warning, it's an error, it's an alert. In some cases where we need to have a stronger guarantee that the user has seen the information because maybe it's critical to the application, we can use some fairly heavy-handed techniques to really, guarantees too strong a word, but as close as we can get to guarantee that the user has seen it. It's here is heavy artillery, use sparingly. So if you did too much of this, you would just annoy your user. You don't want to do this. You only want to do this where it is utterly essential that the user sees this, and you want to have some degree of reassurance that is the case. Three different ways. First one, use a modal dialog. So modal dialog is a pop-up dialog that would appear, that as soon as it appears, the user can't interact with the rest of the application until they have dismissed that dialogue or that alert. So it gets in their face, it requires them to, one hopes, read it, take appropriate action, then to dismiss it. Play a distinct alert sound. So it again, that sound has been enabled on it. But whenever there's an error, play an alert, and again it highlights the user that, oh, something happened there. They can pay attention to it. Briefly, flash or wiggle, where you have a sudden change in movement. Again, that generally, if there's a sudden change in movement or a wiggle, it acts to attract the eye. The eye is quite often pulled over to look at it. Is used to great effect, annoying effect admittedly, by advertisers. So in a lot of banners or pop-ups on web pages, you'll see that they will use wiggling text, they will use flashing images or whatever, because they're trying again to pull your eye over and look at it. So like I said, use sparingly. It can genuinely be annoying if overused. So takeaways on this. Important thing to recognize when we're thinking about what it is the user sees. It's based on their experiences, what they expect to see, the goals that they have. So we should not simply assume that if we put information on the screen, it's going to be visible to the user. It may not be. In particular, because we focus, or generally do focus on one area of the screen, the bit that we're using, we need to be careful about elements that are displayed in the peripheral to that. And this is where it comes in. It's important to understand what it is the user is trying to be doing, where the user is likely to be looking at, so we can maximize the opportunity the user will get to see whatever information we are presenting. And that's the final point. We should try to understand the goals of our users, what they expect to see, where they're likely to be using. If we have that information, then that is something that will help us best design our interfaces. And that's all we want to cover here. The final one in the user experience design section, we'll have a look at thinking about how we cognitively process information.